Have you ever gone through your old stock of paints and wondered whether you should keep them or throw them? It's relatively an easier decision when it comes to acrylic paint or oil paint because once the paint dries, it's basically very difficult to revive them. But what about water-soluble paints such as watercolor or gouache? Today, let's talk about gouache paints. Let's begin by talking about what are gouache paints and compare them with more commonly used mediums such as watercolor and acrylic paints. Like the watercolor paints, the gouache paints also contain color pigment and water-soluble binders such as gum arabic. But here's where the similarity with watercolor ends. The pigment size of gouache paints are much larger and they also contain white pigment or chalk. As a result, instead of the transparent effect that the watercolor gives, the gouache paints gives a more opaque and matte finish. And of course, what makes them different from acrylic paint is the fact that they can be reactivated even after they are dry. So what makes gouache such a great medium to work with? One of the reasons artists prefer gouache paint is because it's such a versatile medium. Not only can it give a translucent effect to watercolor, but it can also give a flat, opaque effect of acrylic paints. And unlike watercolors, you can build multiple layers with gouache paints, and that gives you a flexibility of going back and making corrections once the paints are dry. The advantage they have over acrylic paint is that they can be re-wet and reworked much after your artwork is completed. Now, gouache as a medium has always intrigued me, and yet I've not extensively worked with it. Last year, just before the COVID pandemic struck, I had bought a box of Nevskaya Palitra's MasterClass Gouache set. But apart from few sketches, I did not end up using it much. In today's video, I'm going to reopen the box and check whether it's still usable after 1 year of purchase. The Nevskaya Palitra Masterclass Gouache paints that I would be reviewing today contain 16 jars, each containing 20 ml of paints. Like all Nevskaya Palitra paints, the packaging has information in English as well as Russian and also some other European languages. It mentions here that the product can be applied to paper, cardboard and primed canvas. It also says that after drying, the surface becomes matte and velvety and the paints can be easily washed off with water. Now, I had bought this set in February 2020 and at that point it had costed me about Rs 980, but it's currently available on Amazon at Rs 1099. You can see some stains here, which is actually the binder that has leaked. Let's check the paints inside. There are 2 jars of zinc white included, and that's extremely thoughtful since white is one of the most often used paints in gouache. The rest of the color range is also pretty good. One thing I'd like to mention is that the jars are extremely difficult to open and you may have to use a pocket knife or blade to unhinge them. I have checked out all the paints and I must say that I'm impressed to observe that most of the jars have retained the moist consistency of a freshly bought set. The exception is this jar of burnt sienna, which is completely hardened. Now technically, since gouache is a water-based medium, it is possible to revive this by adding water, but not only is it going to take a lot of effort, but also the pigment strength is going to be weak. So I will just activate a little bit for a swatch test and then keep this jar aside. One of the trickiest things about gouache painting is to get the consistency of the paints right. The paint should neither be too thick nor too watery, but a perfect creamy consistency. The color selection in the set is really good. There are 2 shades of each color, both in warm and cool hues, so that gives ample opportunity to mix a wide range of shades. Let's proceed to make a few sketches. 3 important things to keep in mind while using gouache paints are: 1. In gouache, the lighter colored paints dry darker and the darker paints dry lighter, which basically means that the values would look different when the paints dry up. 2. While layering, allow the base layer to dry completely before adding additional layers. And do be extra careful not to disturb the lower layers of paints. 3. As you add additional layers, remember to work from thinner consistency to thicker. Now I just quickly want to compare these freshly rendered sketches with the sketches that I had made a year ago. Since most of the paints in the box are single pigment and light resistant, you can see that the paints have retained their pigment strength and vibrancy even after a year of storage. The thought that comes to my mind after doing these demo sketches is, why haven't I used gouache paints often enough? I love the opaque flat effect of these paints on my painting, and unlike an acrylic paint which gives a glossy effect, these paints gave a nice matte finish to my paintings. And talking specifically about Nevskaya Palitra's MasterClass Gouache set, I must say I'm pretty impressed by how the pigment has still retained its strength and vibrancy despite sitting through a year of extreme climate. With the exception of one jar, all the paints were smooth and creamy to apply. I even liked the color selection in the box because it helped me to mix a spectacular hue of colors. I'm so excited about rediscovering these paints and totally recommend that you try them out. If you enjoyed this video, do click the like button and do subscribe to my channel to watch an art supply review every Wednesday.